Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be talking about my favourite books of 2023. I don't actually know off the top of my head how many books I read in total in 2023. I think it was like 90 something books. I don't think I made it quite to the 100 mark. I think it was like 90 something. I'll put it on screen. So there were lots of books to choose from and I have picked out my 10 favorite reads of 2023. These aren't books necessarily that published in 2023, although I think some of them are. But these are just books that I read in 2023. So there's lots of them that were published in years previous. I'm not going to rank them like exactly 10 to 1, but the final 3 books that I'm going to talk about are definitely like standout ones. Like they're ones that were like my favorites. There's lots of different factors that go into something being a 5-star read for me or like a favorite read. I tend to prefer books that are really character driven. And I think that really goes to show with the one non-fiction book that has made it onto my top 10 list. So I like character driven books, kind of morally complex characters. I like some real like juicy stuff in the plot as well. Like, oh, I just love the drama. And I do like there to be like a high quality of writing, but if something is just like super fun, that's also a big factor for me. Like I don't think like any of the books on this list that you might categorize as kind of more literary, I think are very much more like a book club fiction. Like it's quite accessible writing, but like lots of like meat to the plot, like lots of stuff to talk about when it comes to the plot and the characters. And you know, sometimes it's just vibes. Like, did I have a good fucking time reading these books? Yes, I did. So I have 3 young adult books to talk about, 1 non-fiction, and the rest is all fiction for adults. So I'm going to start by talking about the YA. So these are the 3 YA books that made it onto my favourites list. I'm going to start with Ace of Spades because this was a book that I'd heard lots of really mixed things about. I'd heard some people saying that they really loved it, some people saying that they thought the plot was kind of too complicated, but I really liked this. And I do think going into it with quite like measured, unsure expectations meant that this like really took me by surprise with how much I did really enjoy it. So this is a book that is set at this really kind of high achieving, prestigious high school. And we have 2 main characters, Devon and Chiamaka, and someone at this school is out to get them both. This anonymous texter called Aces starts circulating texts around the school, leaking things about these 2 teenagers' lives, raising their suspicions, raising their paranoia, and threatening to leak things that are really quite sinister and would be really detrimental to these teenagers' lives. And as the plot unfolds, we realize there is something way creepier, sinister, more deep-rooted going on than someone just spreading gossip around the school. Like, this is something that is really deep-rooted and acts as this really intelligent way to talk about systemic oppression, because both of our main characters are the only Black students at this school. I thought that was really cleverly done. I found myself like really racing to find out what was going to happen in this. Like, the plot of this is like a thriller, and I think the author did an incredible job of saying what they wanted to say about institutionalized racism within this really compelling, entertaining, page-turning plot. It's also always a bonus for me when there is LGBTQ plus representation in books, and I thought how that was explored in this book was done in a really like nuanced way that I think we don't often see in books for teenagers. And LGBTQ plus characters is something that's going to crop up in the rest of my favorites. I think 50% of my list has LGBTQ plus focus in it, including both of the other YA books that are on the list. I really loved Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron, and this is another one that, like Ace of Spades, it really took me by surprise with how much I ended up loving it. I don't tend to be like a huge fantasy person, but I really liked this one, and I'm so keen to read more from Kaylin Byron now. So this is set in a society that is really based around like the Cinderella story. So all of the children have been told the Cinderella story throughout growing up. The Cinderella story happened 200 years ago, and it's really like the foundation of everything that is core to how this society functions, including this tradition where young women are fighting to be picked by a man, and the man you are picked by at this really big ball that happens every year has a huge impact on how the rest of your life is going to unfold, but also the lives of your family. So it's a really huge focus for families getting their daughters ready in order to be picked. And then class plays a factor in that because, you know, some families can afford to give their daughters, you know, amazing dresses and other families can't, and that kind of inequality. And if a girl isn't chosen, then that is a huge amount of shame against not only her, but her family. And our main character, Sophia, decides she does not want to be part of that anymore. She doesn't want her life to be mapped out in that way, and she is going to rebel and run away from the system. And the journey that takes her on leads her on this path of discovery, finding out more about that original Cinderella story and how the citizens of where she lives may have been misled about the true origins of that story and what actually happened. And the more she digs into that, meeting people along that journey, the more she realizes everything has been based upon untruths. This was another one where I just found myself racing to the end. I really needed to know what happens. I do love a fairy tale inspired story. I'm also obsessed with the designs for Kaylin Byron's books. I think they are just so gorgeous. And the final young adult book on this list is Loveless by Alice Oseman. So this book had a lot of LGBTQ plus representation in it, but it also looked at some things that I've not read tons about, even though I am someone that reads a lot about these kinds of topics. We are following Georgia, who is starting university, which is, of course, a time of discovery from everyone. They're navigating life in a new way. They're meeting new people. They're navigating how to maintain the friendships that they had from high school and growing up. They're mixing with lots of people that they've not mixed with before. And for Georgia, learning more about her sexuality and meeting people and discussing her sexuality is a real eye-opener for her. She has never really been sure. Does she like guys? Does she like girls? She is obsessed with fan fiction and has a real kind of adoration for the romance that she has in fan fiction, but she just hasn't really experienced that in her own life. And as she begins to explore her own feelings, she learns about terms like asexual and aromantic and feels a real resonance with those. I really loved how this book captured what a unique time it is when you first go to university and you are learning all of these things about yourself and discovering these things about yourself, and it's confusing and you're kind of trying to be an adult for the first time, and just what an eye-opening experience that is. I still have a few Alice Oseman books to read, and it makes me so happy to know that they are just like waiting for me to love them as well. Okay, so the non-fiction book that is on my list is The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. I mentioned at the top of the video how much I love character-driven books, so I think it's really interesting that this is the one non-fiction book that has made it onto this list, because I guess it is really character driven, even though like it's about real people. So this book is about the untold lives of the victims of Jack the Ripper, who was a murderer based in London in 1888. And it is often spoken about all of his victims being united by the fact that they were prostitutes, and that is not accurate. There isn't evidence to support all of these women being prostitutes, and that piece of misinformation is often used to kind of dismiss the lives of these women in like a really misogynistic way. So they were Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane, and in each section of this book, Hallie Rubenhold does some phenomenal research into the lives of these women and presents their life stories in as much detail as she can, from their childhoods up to their adulthoods and the circumstances around their murders. And we really see what fascinating people these women were, and also the systemic circumstances that led them being vulnerable to an attack from someone like Jack the Ripper, and kind of how the society around them really ultimately failed them and failed to protect them and failed to support them. I do really love nonfiction books that take a look at something really specific in this way. And obviously with these murders taking place in London and much of these women's lives taking place in London, although they are certainly further afield in some cases, the parts that were set in London really resonated with me. It was really like, to be honest, quite unsettling to hear about the events that took place and what these places used to be like when they are places that like I know so well now and frequent, and they are such different places now. I did not want to put this down when I was reading it. I was reading it on a coach journey, so I really had like a lot of time to sit down with it, really get into it, and I found it completely fascinating. Okay, I have a couple of romance books that have made it onto my top list. My roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. This has made it onto the list because I just had a damn good time. Like, this was so entertaining, so fun. Like, I think this was probably my most fun reading experience of the whole year. So we are following Cassie, who desperately needs a place to live. Like, she doesn't have much money, and she sees this apartment advertised really, really cheap, to the point where she is kind of suspicious about it. Like, what's the catch? And there are definitely like some weird things about this apartment. Like, its decor is like very, very old-fashioned and a bit strange. The guy who owns the flat, Frederick, is also a bit strange. Like, he's also very old-fashioned. He just doesn't seem to like really know a lot about the contemporary world. And turns out, of course, he is a vampire. And it is just so funny seeing the way these two characters interact, and how Frederick really misunderstands situations because he just hasn't lived in modern society, and the way they kind of like get their wires crossed, and he just comes across really, really funny without meaning to. I had so much fun just watching these characters interact, and also how they communicate via notes as well. Like, the notes were always really funny. And despite that really funny setup, when it came to the moments of like intense chemistry between these two characters and the steamy scenes, it felt really authentic. Like, the transition between it being really funny and really sexy wasn't jarring at all. It was done really well. This book just made me experience joy in a way that I don't think any other book did this year. The next book I'm going to talk about is Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. Now, I've read this one really recently. It was one of the last books I read in December. So I feel like it may be kind of unfair for me to put this on the list, because all of the other books have had like the test of time, you know? I still find myself thinking about them months later, thinking about how much I enjoyed reading them. Whereas like, I don't know at this point if I'm going to have that experience with Icebreaker. Like, I don't know if in 3 or 4 months I'm going to be thinking about it as fondly as I am now. But just like the book I talked about previously, I just had so much fun reading this book. Like, I feel like it has to go on the list because I just enjoyed myself so much reading this. I don't think I need to tell you too much about the plot of this. I feel like most people have read this already. But very quickly, this is about an ice skating star and an ice hockey star who are forced to share a rink at college. And obviously that leads to tension, but also sexual tension. What I loved about this book was that it just felt really authentic to me, to like the way people who are like fun young people develop relationships. Like, the level of messy felt really appropriate. Like, it wasn't overly messy to the point where it's like, I felt like the author was just injecting drama for the sake of it. The spicy scenes were phenomenally done. Enjoyed very much. But the way our leads, Nate and Anastasia, moved from that kind of competitive sexual tension towards something more romantic felt really well paced, really authentic, really genuine to me. Anastasia, I love her. And I also had a huge amount of affection for Nate. Like, I just thought they were both really fantastic, compelling, nuanced characters. I completely understand why so many people have been loving this book, so I'm really excited to read Wildfire soon. Okay, adult fiction now. I read The Herd by Emily Edwards, and this is one of the kind of most morally complex and thought-provoking books that I read in 2023. So this is a book that is ultimately kind of about how people decide to parent differently, and how that can impact the relationships that you have with the other adults, other parents in your life. We're mainly following two women who have been friends for a really long time, Elizabeth and Bryony, and there's lots of things about them that are really kind of like polar opposite, but they have been really close friends. And the crux of tension in this novel is their differing approaches to vaccinating their children. So for one of the mothers, it is so important that children are vaccinated. Her daughter had a huge number of health issues and seizures growing up, so she wasn't able to get vaccinated against MMR. So she is super conscious of making sure that her daughter does not catch any kind of disease, but of course, especially measles. And the other woman we are following in this novel essentially misleads her friend. Like, she allows her friend to believe that her child is vaccinated when they are not. And the book follows the lead up to this discovery of that misinformation and the aftermath. And it's not just the differences between these two women, it's people like kind of weighing in with their opinions, these women's partners who have differing ideas about how to raise a child and the decisions you make around a child's health and who gets to make that decision around a child's health. This novel is so super like morally nuanced and complex, and that was the thing that I was really drawn into this for. It's the thing that kept me reading it. I've read it so quickly, and also it was really thought-provoking to consider, you know, what impact that kind of thing might have on my own life in the future, like people deciding to parent their children differently. Like, it's not something that I'd ever really considered. I kind of think I'd just assumed, and this is so like echo chambery of me, I'd kind of just assumed that all of my friends might decide to parent in the same way that I would decide to, and that is such a massive presumption. So this book really prompted me to face that and consider it in a way that I never had before. So yeah, thought this was fantastic. Okay, these next 3 books are the biggies. Like, these 3, I'm not going to talk about them in any particular order. This is like not a 3-2-1 ranking, but these 3 are the like creme de la creme. These are the ones that I really loved this year. You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emeze. Oh my god, this book, I think about it all of the time. So this book is about Faye, and it is about her journey of kind of coming to terms with grief after her husband tragically died, building her life up again, and opening herself up to romance again, which is something that she has really struggled with. She meets this guy who on the surface seems really fantastic. He's really patient with her in terms of kind of emotional and physical intimacy, because obviously she is struggling with the feelings around being with someone after her husband's death. And she is offered this opportunity to go to an island with him. This is like a utopia like island. Like, it is gorgeous and warm and beautiful. And I don't want to spoil what ends up happening there, because there was such a gasp moment for me in this book, because Faye starts developing feelings for someone that she really shouldn't do. And that unfolding was just one of these moments of like, oh my god, the drama. This was ticking a lot of the boxes that I've already spoken about, like morally complex, there are queer characters, there's complicated friendship dynamics, there are complicated family dynamics. I never really read a book about the grief of a partner like I had with this book, and that was something that I found really emotionally like impactful. This was another book where I was just racing towards the end because I desperately needed to know what was going to happen. I would love to see an adaptation of this. Like, I so would. I just think it would look so beautiful, and you could cast it so beautifully, and I would love to see this as like a mini series. Carrie Soto is back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have been a huge Taylor Jenkins Reid fan for years and years, even before it was cool. But her most recently written books hadn't really hit the spot for me in the same way that some of her backlist did, like Evelyn Hugo did, like Daisy Jones did. And for me, this was Taylor Jenkins Reid back at her best. So this book is about a retired tennis star called Carrie Soto, who was phenomenally successful. She broke a bunch of records, but there is a new like hotshot young tennis player who is on track to beat one of Carrie Soto's records. So she decides that she's going to come out of retirement, get training again, get competing again to prevent her records from being broken. There was a lot of tennis in this book, like a lot of tennis, but it was so impressive to me how Taylor Jenkins Reid managed to literally write tennis matches out on the page, and it feels so tense. Like, it felt like you were reading a thriller. That you really didn't know what was going to happen. Was Carrie going to win? Was she going to be defeated? What kind of emotional and physical journey was she going to go on over the course of a singular tennis match? Like, it felt so high stakes. I really enjoyed seeing the father-daughter relationship between Carrie and her dad. Her dad was also her tennis coach, and it was really interesting to watch how that relationship worked, like him playing both the role of a father and a coach, and how that became like messy and complicated. I love how Taylor Jenkins Reid like intersects the world of like celebrity and gossip into her books as well. I love sports featuring in fiction as well. I mean, they're very different books, but this and Icebreaker both featured quite a lot of sport in them, and not only the literal like activity of doing the sports themselves, but I also found it really fascinating how the author depicted the kind of media attention around Carrie Soto and how the media treated her particularly as like a strong female athlete. There were so many things I loved about this book, and it is now one of my favorite books from this author. And the final book I'm going to talk about, and if you really pushed me, if you really pushed me, this might be my number one book of the year. Like if gun to my head, if I had to pick one, I think I might pick this one. And that is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I've loved every Caroline O'Donoghue book that I've read. And this is essentially kind of like this all-consuming love story, but it's not a romantic love story. This is ultimately a story that is about the kind of intensity of friendship. So we are following two young people that meet while working in a bookstore and very quickly move in together. So we have Rachel and James, and it is following their lives living together. And I think the author brilliantly captured kind of sharing a flat with someone as a young person and some of the really particular things about that and how quickly you kind of build an intimacy with that person. And what propels a lot of the plot of this book is how Dr. Byrne weaves his way into the lives of both Rachel and James. So Dr. Byrne is one of Rachel's college or university lecturers. She's got a bit of a thing for him. There's a bit of an attraction to him there. But it's actually way more complicated than a crush. And again, I don't want to spoil kind of what happens in this book, but it gets really messy and complicated in terms of the relationship dynamics between James and Rachel and Dr. Byrne, like all three of them. That gets quite messy. I also thought the way that Caroline O'Donoghue told this story was really fascinating because you're being told it by an older Rachel who is looking back on her life. And I thought the perspective of someone who is kind of older, more experienced, wiser, looking back on their early 20s was a really nice touch to how the narrative of this unfolded. And it meant it also touched on how those really intense relationships, friendships that you have as a young person develop as you mature. This was really like easy reading. Like, I think this is the type of book where you very easily could sit down and read it in one go. And I think this ultimately really hit that sweet spot for me. You know, it's something that wasn't difficult to read. It was very like quick to read, easy to read, but there was so much packed in there, so much to discuss packed in there. And I would love to talk to more people about this book. So there may be an opportunity on the cards for us to do that very soon. But yeah, loved this book. So that is it. They were my top 10 reads of 2023. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Let me know what your favorite reads of last year were. If you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me an emoji that you think relates to one of the books that have been on this list. Some of them might be really obvious, but I wonder if some of them I'll be like trying to figure out what book that emoji refers to. I really want to take the pressure off my reading in 2024. I mean, I have tons of unread books, like an embarrassing amount of unread books, and I would like to, you know, really get through them, but I just want to experience reading as joy this year. That's really what I want. That is it for me today. I hope you're doing well, and I will speak to you next time.